Hi, my name is Srinjoy and my presentation is on Napoleon Bonaparte. So in my presentation, I will be following Napoleon's life. First off, I'll be starting off with his adolescence. Then I'll be moving on to his education and his career and how he rose to the power. And then I will be ending off my presentation with the Napoleonic Wars. So in his adolescence, I'll be exploring all the way from his birth to his education and his rise to the power. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on the island of Corsica, which is a French island a bit southeast of France, as you can see from this map. And he was born on August 15th. He was fourth of the 11 children of Carlo Bonaparte and Lizia Romolino. Napoleon's education started at an all-boys school in Ajaccio, France. At age 10, he was allowed to enter French military school for aristocrats, and that was the College of Audun in Burgundy, France, and the picture of College of Audun is on the left. Afterwards, he transferred to the College of Brienne, which is on the right, and then he graduated from that school in 1785. So Napoleon started his military career being the lieutenant in an artillery regiment of the French army. And as you can see from this picture, this is Napoleon as lieutenant. So for the next couple of slides, I'm going to be looking at the French Revolution because that is what essentially gave Napoleon his rise to power and being the leader of France. So, before the revolution, France had an exorbitant amount of debt to pay as a result of years of war with England. This resulted in an increase of tax to be paid as war reparations. This burden of tax fell on peasants as higher classes, such as nobles, refused to be taxed. And this at last resulted in the French Revolution of 1789. And within 3 years, revolutionaries, who were the lower classes and oppressed individuals, had overthrown the monarchy and claimed a republic. And on the left image, you can see the execution of Louis XVI, who was the then King of France. And on the right image, you can see the motto of the revolution, which is Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité ou la mort, which translates to English in liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. Corruption and chaos of the Republic. After 1795, the Republic was governed by 5 men called the Directorate. These men were corrupt and there was constant fighting among them. They had the idea to continue wars as expenses actually strengthened the economy, so they decided to prolong war with other countries to stay in power. Napoleon gave the strong military leadership when people within the French government decided to overthrow the Directorate, and then Napoleon was made one of the 3 councils, which was a stepping stone to his power. And as you can see from this picture down at the bottom, this is the Directorate elections of 1795. Napoleon, as he decided to rewrite laws, calm corruption, and bring stability back to France, and achieve victories against France's continental enemies. And as you can see from this picture, Napoleon, down at the bottom, Napoleon is one of the 3 councilmen, and he is the one in the middle. So Napoleon as consul, he decided to wage many wars against the many countries in Europe from the course of 1800 to 1815. And these wars are identified as the Napoleonic Wars. And it started with the Battle of Marengo in the 1800. So in this battle, the French and Austrian army met in Italy to fight. French army consisted of 24,000 forces, and the Austrian army consisted of 31,000 forces. So the French army, as we see, was outnumbered by 7,000 men. However, the Austrian army suffered 14,000 casualties, whereas the French army only had suffered 5,500 casualties. And as a result, the French was victorious, or Napoleon, under his command, France was victorious, and the outcome secured his military and civilian authority in Paris. So this was a big stepping stone for Napoleon, as now he had proven himself in a battle against such a large army. So as we see, this picture is a painting of the Battle of Marengo, and Napoleon, being the one on the horse, is seen commanding his troops. And we can see behind him and all around him are his men, his French army, and we can see the clothing they were wearing, the types of guns they were using, and yeah. So a very pivotal point in his career happened in 1804 when Napoleon crowned himself as emperor, and this gave him authority to do whatever he desired. And as you can see from this picture below, this is Napoleon as emperor. So in 1805, Britain and Russia began forming the Third Coalition as an attempt to stop Napoleon from invading other countries and to suppress Napoleon. And this is where the Battle of Ulm Pit occurred. So this was a major strategic triumph by Napoleon as he conducted his Grand Armée, which is basically another name for his Grand Army or his army. And this is where French forces and the Austrian army met in Bavaria, which is a region in Germany. And the French forces consisted of 80,000 men, whereas the Austrian army consisted of 40,000 men. And this was a major French victory with only, as Napoleon had only suffered 400 casualties, whereas the Austrian army had suffered 4,000. And as we see from this painting here, this is a painting of the Battle of Ulm Pit. And this painting was done by Charles Thévenin, who was a neoclassical French painter known for heroic scenes from time of the French Revolution to Napoleon's time and the first French Empire. And as we can see in this picture, there's the French forces on the left, and there's the Austrian forces on the right in the orange coats. So in 1806, Prussia joined the Third Coalition, which included Britain and Russia, to stop Napoleon, and Prussia was a former country. And then Napoleon's army won two simultaneous victories at the Battle of Jena and the Battle of Auerstadt, inflicting significant losses on the Prussian army. And Battle of Jena-Auerstadt were tying battles in today's Germany, and it resulted in decisive French victory. And as a result, Napoleon entered Berlin. And as we see from this painting here, this is the painting of Battle of Jena-Auerstadt, and this, on the horse, there is Napoleon reviewing the Imperial Guards on the right, and this painting was done by Horace Vernet in 1836. So in 1807, the Battle of Friedland occurred, and this was another battle of the Napoleonic Wars, and this was between France and Russia. So the French army consisted of 80,000 troops, and by the end of the battle, France had suffered 10,000 casualties, whereas the Russian army consisted of 62,000 troops, and by the end of the battle, Russia had suffered 20,000 casualties. And this was a decisive French victory, and one for Napoleon as he would attack Russia later on. This is the painting of the Battle of Friedland, and Napoleon is seen on his white horse at the middle of the picture, and he is seen giving instructions to General Nicolas Oudinot, and between them is General Etienne de Nansouty, and behind Napoleon on his right is Marshal Michael Ney. So in 1809, the Battle of Wagram happened, and this was another battle in the Napoleonic Wars. And this was a battle where the French and Austrian forces met in Wagram, and the French army consisted of 160,000 men, whereas it only suffered 40,000 casualties. And the Austrian army consisted of 173,000 men, where it only suffered 40,000 casualties. And after 2 days of fighting, France secured a decisive victory under the command of Napoleon. And as we can see from this picture here, this is Napoleon on his white horse, and this is the Battle of Wagram. And in the distance, we can see the forces, his army fighting. And this was a painting done by Horace Vernet, who was another French painter. So 1812 marked a very pivotal point in Napoleon's career as he attacked Russia, which would bring to his downfall. So when France attacked Russia, they had pushed Russian forces all the way back to Moscow. And in the Battle of Borodino in 1812, this was Russia's last attempt to save Moscow. And this was seen as the deadliest battle of the Napoleonic Wars. So France in this battle consisted of 190,000 men and suffered 35,000 casualties. And Russia consisted of nearly 160,000 men and suffered 45,000 casualties. And this was a French victory, and as a result, Napoleon had entered Moscow, which was abandoned and set on fire as Russia had followed the policy of scorched earth, which is a policy of basically once the Russian forces started retreating from France to Moscow, it would burn every village and everything, so that it could not be used by the French army as a place for shelter and etc. So as a result, he didn't really find anything in Moscow, so then he started his journey back to France. So as Napoleon retreated from Moscow, he began to face difficulties as remaining Russian forces closed in on him. And this is when the Battle of Berezina took place, as Russia's attempt to stop fleeing French forces from crossing the Berezina River. And although Napoleon crossed the river, his army suffered massive casualties, and Napoleon had escaped Russia, but he nearly lost 400,000 men due to the harsh winter. And Napoleon's army had been totally annihilated. And this battle right here is the Battle of Borodino, which was, as I mentioned, was Russia's last attempt to save Moscow. And in this battle, we can see the French forces fighting against the Russians. And this famous painting was done by Louis-François Lejeune, who was a French general as well as a painter. So this picture right here is Napoleon's entrance to Moscow. As we can see, the Russians had followed the scorched earth policy, and we see that like everything has been destroyed and burned down because they don't want Napoleon to stay here, which forces Napoleon to retreat back to Paris. And in this picture right here, we can see the Russians and the French forces fighting in the distance, and this picture was, as I mentioned, the Battle of Berezina, which was Russia's attempt to stop Napoleon from fleeing back to Paris or France. And this painting was done by January Suchodolski, who was a Polish painter and an army officer. So after Napoleon retreated back to Paris, the Battle of Paris ensued in 1814, which was fought between France, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. And in this battle, basically, Russia, Austria, and Prussia teamed up against France. And at the time, since Napoleon had lost so many men due to the harsh conditions in Russia, the harsh winter conditions, Napoleon's army only consisted of 20,000 men. And in this battle, 5,000 died, and Russia, Austria, and Prussia's army consisted of 150,000 men, and of whom 18,000 were killed. And this was a defeat for France, as France surrendered, and the aftermath of this was that Napoleon abdicated his throne, and then afterwards he was exiled to Elba, which is a French island. This is a picture of the Battle of Paris, and in this picture, this painting is a specific representation of defense of the clergy, and a clergy is a commune in the northwestern suburbs of Paris. In 1815, Napoleon escaped the island of Elba, the island he was exiled to, and afterwards the Battle of Ligny ensued. And in this battle, the French forces fought against the Austrian, and it defeated the Austrian army. And this battle also marked the last victory for Napoleon in his Napoleonic Wars and his entire military career. And afterwards, the Battle of Waterloo ensued, and this battle was fought between France, Britain, Netherlands, Hanover, Nassau, Brunswick, and Prussia. So France was against all of these countries, and this was fought in Belgium, which is a country in Europe, which is relatively close to France. And Napoleon's army in this battle consisted of 73,000 men, while all of his opponents' armies combined consisted of 68,000 men. So as we can see, French people were still pretty optimistic about Napoleon, as Napoleon went from 30,000 men after his defeat in Russia to gain back to 73,000 men. And in this battle, Napoleon suffered huge losses, as he lost close to 41,000 men. That's nearly half his army gone. And this defeat marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars and also his military career. And afterwards, he was exiled to the island of St. Helena, where he died in isolation at the age of 51 years. This is a painting of the Battle of Waterloo, and this was done by William Sadler, who was a famous Irish painter. And in this painting, the redcoats are Britain's forces, Britain's army, and in the background you can see the French army in the blue coats. It's very distinct, but you can still see it. And yeah. So in conclusion, we can really conclude that Napoleon had impacted Europe severely, as his conquest was largely fueled by nationalism, which was a relatively new idea that then took a hold of Europe in the 1800s and contributed to late colonial efforts around the world. After Napoleon was defeated, the borders of Europe were redrawn to create a more stable balance of power. These nations shifted to more conservative governments to prevent similar revolutions and rebellions. Importantly, Napoleon's fighting with Spain and Portugal disrupted management of their colonies in the Americas, leading to many of those countries' independence. So, therefore, Napoleon can be seen as a really important historical figure in European history, and this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks for watching.